Hello. For those of you who are turned in for the first time, this is the fifth lesson in our study of the uniqueness of the Gospel of John. This is a 25-minute session which will go through the Gospel of John, noting some of the things that makes his Gospel stand out from the others. John had a unique way of writing his Gospel. He chose unique words to describe the miracles of Jesus. We're going to be talking about some of those in our lesson. If this is the first time you've tuned in, I urge you to go back and look at lessons 1 through 4 in order to keep all the material together. Now, the John chapter 20, 30 and 31 is our key text we're using throughout our study. And I've used this several times already. We'll use it again because it sets the theme for our material. John says in chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, as he brings his gospel to a close, he has one more chapter after this, but basically brings it to a close. He says, and many other signs did Christ perform, but these are written so that you might believe in Christ as the Son of God, and that through him you may have eternal life. Now, in our previous studies, we've discussed how John selects only 8 miracles to describe. Of all the miracles that Christ performed, he only selects 8. And each of these miracles is designed to prove that Christ was the Son of God. In our last lesson, we started talking about how that these signs could not be denied. And one of the things that John emphasizes throughout his gospel, not only is he how the word sign is unique, but he also uses the term believe, our, glory, and the I am statements in a very calculated way to prove his theme, that Christ was the Son of God and that you and I could have life through his name. Now, if you'd like a handwritten copy of these or a printed copy, you can contact us and we'll try to get one of those for you. Now, in contrast to so-called miracles of today, the miracles performed by Jesus could not be denied. Now, if you'll think back of the faith healers on TV, and I say faith healers, really it's the so-called faith healers, they never show someone being healed of something that can actually be seen. Have you seen anyone come on one of the programs with a hand that's deformed and they walk away with a perfect smooth hand? Have you ever seen someone come on the program maybe with a cleft palate and the person performs a miracle and all of a sudden their face is like it should be and looks presentable to all of us? I'm not saying that those who have a cleft palate, that your face isn't like it ought to be. But you know what I'm talking about, okay? Have you ever seen someone come on that maybe an arm is missing? Or they say, I've been lame for 30 years. And the person prays for them, and all of a sudden they can walk. If they do, there's something involved in it. Christ never tried to deceive the people. All the miracles that Christ chooses, none of these miracles can be denied. He carefully selects that so that no one can be misled, so no one can be hurt in any way. There are always miracles that could not be denied. Now, we noticed last week the first of these, and that was the turn of water into wine. Now we're going to notice the second. In John chapter 4 and verses 46 through 54, we hear about the man, many refer to him as a nobleman. He's a very important man. His son was at the point of death. And he comes to Jesus and he says, please come with me to my town, because my son is dying. Now we notice that the son was at the point of death, in verse 47. The child was in another town, verse 49. And the healing took place immediately. We're going to find out in just a few minutes as we talk about the servants and everything, okay? Now, when Christ first meets the man, Jesus made the statement in verse 42, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. This is something that the people wanted to see, And he says, you're not going to believe if you see some sign or wonder. And when he says that, he says, go home. Your son is well. And if you notice, in verse 50, the man did not hesitate to return home. When Christ said, your son is well, it says the man immediately, right then, he didn't argue. He didn't say, but now, Lord, you need to go with me. Please come with me. And you've got to be there. When Christ said, go home, your son is well, the man believed Christ and went home. And then we're going to find as the man is on his way home, he is going to meet his servants. Now, the servants had no idea that Christ has told the man to come home. They're on the way from Capernaum coming to Cana, where the young man lives in Capernaum, and he's in Cana now talking to Jesus. They had no idea that Christ had told the man to go home. And when they meet the next day, they said, your son's well. And the man said, what hour of the day did he get well? He said, it was the seventh hour. And the man said, that's exactly when Christ told me that my son was well. So, the father knew that the miracle had been performed. Wasn't denying about it at all. Also, there's no need, notice here, for Jesus to go to the man's house or to touch the child. It's also noteworthy that when the boy was healed, it says the fever left him immediately in verse 52. Now, if you listen sometimes to the faith healers on TV, the person will say, I came on Brother So-and-so's show last week. He prayed for me, and I started feeling better, and I'm getting better every day. This man's son's fever broke immediately, and he was made well right then. There was no waiting, okay? The sickness was gone. And this is in line with John's underlying principle that when Jesus does something, it is always good and complete. Think back, Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. When God finished the creation, Christ was there. They said, it is good and it is complete. And John continues this in the miracles of Jesus here. When Christ does something, it is good and it's complete. Okay, 5 quick questions now on Nobleman's son. Number 1, how sick was the man's son? Correct. He's at the point of death, okay? That's pretty sick, point of death, okay. Number 2, where was the man's son when Christ performed the miracle? He's at home in where? Capernaum, right? And they're in what city? They're in Cana. Now, from Capernaum to Cana is about 16 miles. And so it takes them a period of time to walk. The man starts home, the servant starts towards him, and they meet the next day. Now, will they stop during the night and rested some? I don't know, but it takes a while to walk 16 miles. If you just start out walking, it takes a little while to walk 16 miles, okay? Anyway, okay, number 3. It says, how did Jesus answer the man when he asked him to come to his house to heal his son? He says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Your son is well. Number 4, how does the man show his faith in Jesus? He goes home right then. As I said earlier, he didn't say, but Jesus, please come with me. If you'll only come. John says in verse 50 that the man set out to go home right then. Number 5, when Jesus told the man that his son was healed, how long did it take for the miracle to take place? Now, when the man meets the servants, what hour of the day? The 7th hour, the exact same time, okay? All right, number 6, and I answered that question for you. Number 6, I want you to answer this. Stop and think. I'm going to go slow. If you want to write this answer down, I'm going to give you time to write it down. So I'm going to go slow on this. Number 6 says list at least 3 facts that prove that the man's miracle could not be denied. Number 1, the man said his son was sick to the point of death. His servants knew that. Okay, it wasn't just the man. His servants knew that. Number 2, the servants said, "He is now well." They realized that something unusual happened. So they're so excited, they immediately start back to tell the man, "Don't worry, your son's not well." Second point, they say. Then the third point, it took place at the seventh hour when Jesus said he was well. Three ideas show this miracle could not be denied. Okay, the next miracle is found in John chapter 5 and verses 1 through 17. John chapter 5, verses 1 through 17. The third miracle now has the same characteristics of being chosen as the first two because it could not be denied, could not be disproved. In this third miracle, if you have your Bibles and looking at it, I hope you are, in this third miracle, there is no question that the man was crippled. It says the man had been crippled for 38 years, and he was well known by the people. Chapter 5, verses 6 and 7 says he was brought there daily to ask someone if he could be healed. He needed help and everything. And also in keeping with the previous miracles that Christ performed, the result was complete. Not only did the man get up and walk, as directed by Jesus, he carried his bed. No need for crutches, no need for a wheelchair, no need for physical therapy. The man could not only walk, but said he's able to get up and carry his bed, and he had not walked, as far as we can tell, in 38 years. Now, some of you have had a broken bone. Fortunately, I've never experienced that. I had other injuries, but not a broken bone. And when my wife had a broken arm several years ago, they put it in a cast, and she had to go to physical therapy. We've got a young lady that goes to church where I do now that broke her ankle a few weeks ago. And she's now coming back to church, but she's on crutches, and she's learning to walk without her crutches, and she's going to physical therapy every day, or several times a week. But now this man not only been lame for 38 years, probably never walked. As far as we know, he never walked in his life. He may have, we don't know. But he's able to get up and walk immediately. No need for physical therapy, okay? And then we notice another thing takes place here, and it's very important. Even the Jewish leaders did not try to question the fact that a miracle had taken place. They knew the man. They had seen the man. For 38 years, they had seen him. They knew he was lame. And they didn't even try to prove that that a miracle didn't take place. What they attacked is the day on which the miracle occurred, the day on which Christ performed the miracle. Notice in verse 10 it says, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." It's the Sabbath. They were not concerned about the fact he was a man who had been lame for 38 years, and now he could walk. They said, "You've broken the Sabbath. You've broken the holy day, the day of no work." You know, even the Jews, though, had provision in the law that if your ox fell into the ditch, you could get it out of the ditch that day. That was not declared. That was declared as necessary work. And we'll get into that a little bit more in our study, okay? Okay, now let's look at some questions, okay, on the healing of the lame man. Number one, in John chapter 5, verses 6 and 7, how long had a man been lame? 38 years, correct, okay? Number two, pay attention now for me, okay? How do we know that the healing was complete? There's no need for recovery period. It says he got up immediately and walked. No physical therapy, no crutches. It says he got up immediately and walked. Christ says rise and walk, and he gets up and walks, okay? Number three, how does the reaction of the Jews to the miracle show that they could not dispute the fact that a miracle had taken place? They decided to attack Christ not on the miracle itself, but on what? Right, the fact that it took place on the Sabbath day. They knew they couldn't deny the miracle, but they could say Christ sinned. Christ is a guilty person. He is a bad person. He broke the Sabbath day. The number four, the last question, how does this healing of the lame man relate to Genesis 1 and verse 31? It was good and it's complete. Okay? Now, the fourth miracle. This is the feeding of the 5,000. Now, this miracle is different than the three we talked about earlier. The feeding of the 5,000 takes place in at least two other Gospels besides John. It's found in Matthew chapter 14, it's found in Mark chapter 6, and it's found in Luke chapter 9. So it's recorded in all four Gospels, okay? The feeding of the 5,000. And John, and as in other miracles, the fact that a miracle had taken place could not be questioned. Notice what Christ does here. He's aware of what's taking place, or John is. He's aware that Jesus took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed a multitude of people. You know, the apostles knew that this young man, his mother packed him a lunch. He had 5 loaves, 2 fish, and Christ says, seat the people. Have you ever thought why? He says, count the people, set them down. There are 5,000 men, not counting women and children. There may have been as many as 10, 12,000 people there, perhaps even more. You know, think about it. If every man had a wife, and if every husband and wife had a child, we're talking about 15,000 people right there. But Christ, there's a purpose. Christ says, count the men. Okay? Also, once he counted them, he says, okay, I want you to take this food and feed each one. Now, he didn't just take off a little bitty bit. He feeds each one. It says until they were full. Look in John chapter 6 and verse 11 and 12, and it says every person had, or chapter 10, verse 10, every person had as much as they wanted, much they could eat. Also, the disciples were asked, when everybody got their fill, the disciples were asked to collect the food. You ever wondered why they were asked to collect the food? Well, there's a point there. He says, get up the food that's left over. And it's not that Christ was trying to be, nice and kind and not have leftovers laying around on the ground. I think there's more involved in it than that. We have 5 loaves, 2 fish. The people all there have all they want to eat, just enough to feed one person to begin with. It was a lunch that a mother packed for her son. And now everybody has all they want to eat, and they collect 12 baskets full of food. No one could deny that a miracle had taken place. And so John selects this. He notes in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but John says, hey, I got to have that miracle in my gospel too, because it cannot be denied. There was no doubt in the minds of the people that Christ had performed a miracle. In fact, in John chapter 6 and verse 14, John writes, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. No question that a miracle had taken place. All right, 3 quick questions here about this. And the lesson will be yours for today. All right, number 1, name 5 things that took place in the feeding of the 5,000, which show the miracle had taken place. Number 1, they fed over 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's number 2, actually. All right. Number 3, everybody had all they wanted to eat. No one left there hungry. Number 4, they tries to collect all the food so that none is left over. Then number 5, the people believe that Christ is some, if not the Messiah, he's some great person, because the next day they're saying, please be our king. And on top of all that, Christ says, count the people. There were 5,000. Suppose Christ had just said, John had said the disciples were there, they were listening to people to teach, and there were people there gathered around listening to Jesus. It became lunchtime, and Christ said, let's eat. So they take 5 loaves and 2 fish. And it could be, I might could take 5 big loaves, 2 big fish, and feed 12, 15, 20 people maybe, but not 5,000. The miracle couldn't be denied, okay? Okay, that's our session for today. Like I said, the mind cannot endure more, or the mind cannot understand more than the seat can endure.